Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a long overdue Total War Warhammer video. I finally got the game recording software on my new PC operating, so here we go. This is going to be a look back at the Dwarf campaign, which is the first one I did, and this was on normal mode, with it being the first campaign I attempted on this game. I thought normal would be a reasonable place to start. So as many of you should know, I am a bit of a Dwarf enthusiast when it comes to Warhammer. It's the army I've been playing for the longest, so it seemed logical to start with the dwarves in this game. And as far as their starting location, it's very, very easy, I think. It could just be because it's on normal mode and all the nearby factions were very friendly towards me, but you seem to be surrounded by factions that aren't too interested in fighting you. Of course, there is the vampire counts right here, but they tend to have their hands full with everything else, because of course they've got the Empire to the left, and then over here there's the other dwarf faction, or one of the other dwarf factions, so they don't really have that much time to be focusing on the dwarves here. So really the only thing I was fighting off for most of the campaign was the old greenskins, the various greenskin factions that hold a lot of this territory down here. So before I really knew what I was doing at the start of the game, I was kind of plundered and pillaged by Mr. Grimgore Ironhide, and he did lay waste to quite a few of my settlements around here. But he didn't finish me off, thankfully, so I was able to build back up again. And once he started fighting on other fronts, because of course the greenskins also have to deal with some threats from over this side as well, then I was able to get a bit of a foothold and start expanding out. And once I expanded, my territory was never really claimed back. Wherever I went, I was able to hold fairly easily. Obviously, a few occasions where you'll get rebellions that overrun one of your settlements, but not too much at all. One thing I struggled with at first on this game in general, I don't think it's just specific to the dwarves, is getting enough armies to secure all of your territory from enemy incursions. It's difficult to sustain a lot of armies once you start taking up and your units get more expensive. It's difficult to keep standing armies in certain areas. You can generally afford to have slightly less armies than you want to hold down every front, so it makes you think and move your units around based on where they're needed at that particular time. This area up here, which was held by some of my dwarven comrades, I didn't really have to attack them at all, because when Chaos came in, they kind of laid waste to this entire area and just razed all the settlements, which meant I was in a prime position to just waltz in there and claim them all back once I'd dispatched the invading Chaos armies. So I didn't really help my buddies out at all, I just allowed them to be destroyed and then took over their wasted settlements when they were done. I don't think I had to actually do too much fighting against the dwarves, if any at all. Most of them were whittled down by enemies, and then I was able to sweep in there and mop up what they had left. Not in terms of fighting, but in terms of just claiming their settlements and then offering them the lucrative opportunity to become part of my faction, which they happily accepted. I think I own every piece of territory that's available to the dwarves on the campaign map. There might be one or two sneaky ones that I've missed, but I don't think so. So after I dealt with the greenskins in this whole region here, I pretty much completely wiped them out before I did anything else at all. So I got this whole area here, and then it was pretty safe. I kept one army down here to deal with rebellions, but that was it. So I've got all this territory, bringing in the income, and looking at my money here, it didn't actually take me this many turns to finish it. It took me a fair bit less, but I just kept hitting end to try and get over 1 million gold to see if there was an achievement for that or something. Anyway, this area up here was actually quite troublesome, because it takes a long time to march around this area. Even with moving underground, it takes a really long time to get from the territories down here up here, with it being such hazardous terrain. So that was quite a nuisance to claim all of this lot, even though I was just walking through empty settlements. But when a rebellion would pop up in this area, it's difficult to move troops in there to quell it, because then they're stuck there for quite a long time. The vampire counts were never really a threat to me. I don't think I ever actually had a battle against them. I may have had one siege, because they were pretty much consigned to Castle Drakenhof at some point, and that was all they had left. So once I'd taken all this territory here, I pretty much just stared at them for a while, and eventually I attacked Castle Drakenhof and just plundered it pretty much over and over again just for the wealth, until it wasn't really worth doing that anymore, at which point I just laid waste to it. Then, after marching up here, I found that Chaos had pretty much destroyed everything in this general area, so I didn't have to deal too much with the Empire at this point. And they were all friends with me, with trade agreements and everything, the Empire, Bretonnia, the other dwarves. Very, very handy that. I marched several armies up through here, which is fairly difficult actually, because there's not really any territory that you can take as the dwarves in this vicinity here. So you're kind of marching through no man's land until you reach Chaos. And I did get a few armies stranded up here at the start when I was just scouting out and I didn't really know what to expect, being chased around by Chaos. And oddly enough, the dwarves, it's quite easy to run away from the enemy, just because you have that underground movement, so you can just hop across mountains or across woods where the enemy has to walk round, so you can evade the enemy quite well with the dwarves, which is an interesting concept. But once I was friends with everyone, apart from Chaos, that was remaining, I decided to send about 3 or 4 armies up here and just march around and systematically just take out everything that Chaos had to offer, and found that there's actually some nice territory up here that the dwarves can claim, some of these mountain holds. So that came in handy as well. But while I was attacking the Chaos Wastes, that's when the Empire decided that they were actually going to attack me, which wasn't very nice of them at all, and very, very unwise considering I drastically overpowered them. But considering all my armies were otherwise occupied, maybe it was wise. But it turned out not to be wise at all though. As you can see, they've been totally wiped out, as have Bretonnia, and I've got all this nice mountain territory down here. It didn't actually take me too much to take out the Empire. It was fairly easy, because by this point in the game I was extremely powerful, bringing in a lot of gold. So even when they were advancing on my various mountain holds here, they may have taken out a couple of them, but I still had huge swathes of territory all down here, earning just endless supplies of coin. So even when I was fighting in the Chaos Wastes, I was still able to dispatch a couple of armies over there to deal with the Empire, and then once I'd dealt with Chaos, I could send down a couple more, and they just stood no chance. In a war of attrition, I was able to just take them down, because I was bringing in so much endless streams of cash, and they just weren't. It was a really bad idea on their part to attack me, but in the end, I would have attacked them anyway, I'm sure. I didn't really trample on too many of my peace treaties. Maybe marched across 1 or 2 people's territory, but not much at all. I think that's why I was able to not be attacked for the majority of the game. Maybe also having it on normal mode helped with that as well. Like I said, I was only dealing with the greenskins a lot of the time, and then eventually Chaos, before I was able to just roll over what was left of the human realms. A few general things on the dwarves now. The whole underground movement thing, I didn't actually spot that that was an option for a little while, so I played quite a few turns without that. But I think that's the same way with any game. If you're not reading up on it first, you discover things as you go along. It's still telling me I've got technology here with a little alert symbol, but I think I've already unlocked everything here. I was never in too much financial peril throughout the game after the beginning, mainly because I did just own this huge amount of territory here, which wasn't causing me too much trouble at all, since I took out all the greenskins. In terms of battling with the dwarves, it's pretty much the way it is, or the way it was, should I say, in the tabletop game. You have the option of just deploying in the centre and just facing the enemy head on, but you'll quickly find that if you do that, the enemy are just going to flank you with everything they've got. They're not even going to attempt to attack your centre, they're just going to send everything around the flanks. So you quickly end up kind of deploying in the corners, so you just don't have any flanks. And also, I found that I needed a lot of missile troops, especially before I was able to get gyrocopters and gyrobombers, because the enemy, especially the orcs, I was finding that they had a lot of fast missile cavalry. Your goblin missile cavalry and so on, and the Empire, of course, with their outriders and such. So that was one thing that really annoyed me with dwarves, because you don't have a lot of speed to close down those really pesky, annoying, fast missile troops. So if I found myself with an army that was lacking in missile troops and I was up against something like that, I would nearly always auto-resolve it, because the general annoyance factor of having to chase down those really, really weaselly fast cavalry missile units, it's just not worth the hassle of actually going through the game, and I'm going to take a lot of casualties because eventually I'll get so annoyed that I'll get lazy and not corner them in properly, so I just let the AI handle that because I overpower the enemy so much. On the other hand, if I see myself going up against an army that doesn't have any fast missile cavalry at all, even if I'm horrifically outnumbered, I still fancy my chances a little bit. So generally I played those battles out because I think with my superior tactics then I've still got a chance. I will say, starting as the other dwarf factions would probably be a lot more difficult. For example, the one that starts over here, you've got a lot more issues to deal with because you're not in a corner, basically, so it's more difficult to barricade yourself in. The dwarf faction here are among the first that the chaos are going to start reaching and laying waste to. But even though it takes them a really long time to get round here, it's still difficult to hold them off if they haven't already had to march through the enemy and weaken themselves drastically. Because once the chaos started invading this area, I was able to pretty much just leave them alone for a really long time, and it took them so long to get round here and wipe everything out. By the time they got to me, I'd built up such huge forces that I was able to take them out fairly easily, so chaos were never really that much of a threat to me during this campaign. Overall, the dwarf campaign on normal was very, very enjoyable. It's my first campaign in this game, and I'm sure I'd take it to a high difficulty were I to play with the dwarves again. But overall, very, very good time. At no point in the campaign did it really get tedious. Even when I was just mopping up the final enemies, I didn't really get bored. And I think some of that comes down to the way that Total War, in recent times, they've kind of streamlined the territory and settlement management so that you don't have to do quite so much micromanaging. If I'm thinking back to, let's say, Medieval 2, which is the last one I really played to any great degree, and that was fairly recently, I played that one as well. When you start taking over the entire world, it gets really, really tedious keeping track of all your settlements, because going into every single one and managing the individual elements of each settlement gets really, really, really old, really, really fast. Whereas with this game, of course, you have kind of an overview of the provinces and regions, and it's all a little bit more streamlined. So you're not having to concern yourself with going around 100 different settlements, setting different instructions for each one when you're in the late game, when really all you want to do is just march over all the enemy and lay waste to everything they've got. Another reason perhaps that doesn't come into it is that you just can't claim a lot of the territory because it's faction or race specific, which makes sense in the lore. You wouldn't see the dwarves hanging out in the forest too much. So that again makes it easier to manage. I think it took me around about 300 turns to finish this campaign, which I'm hearing is reasonably average, especially for a first attempt. That's not to say all my campaigns are going to take 300 turns, and I can tell you right now that the second campaign I did took significantly more than that, and that's going to be my next video actually, because I went into the old vampire counts next, so you can look forward to hearing all about that. And then there's going to be a lot more juicy content on this game coming very soon, including a nice multiplayer campaign I'm going to do with Mr. Remington Steele, who is of course a veteran of this game, having left it running ever since he purchased it. So I think he's got something like 1,000 hours on it right now, because it's just been sitting on his computer the entire time. He must waste an awful lot of electricity. But we'll see if just leaving the game on in the background actually gives him enough knowledge and know-how to counteract my legendary Warhammer expertise, won't we? Anyway, that's everything for the dwarves. If anyone has any questions, any red-hot tips, since I'm now such an expert, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'll do my best to impart my wisdom upon you. Ta-ta for now, ladies and gentlemen.